I presume you're here in order to learn of Magecraft. I'll have you know, there's no room for the weak-willed in this course, and despite your best efforts, the sorcery of our time is but a fraction of what it once was in the Age of Gods. Much of the craft is established through pedigree, and the culture of mages is riddled with deception and moral depravity. That said, if you insist, I shall do my best to educate you in this miserable, yet fascinating world. In our previous lesson, I covered fairies, the nature spirits that remained in Britain long after other phantasmal species left during the Age of Gods. As iconic as they are, their status is shared by a different type of phantasmal, dragons, specifically one dragon, Albion. If I'm to speak of fairies, it is only fitting that I also discuss dragons, as the most realistic way of finding fairies is to traverse a dragon's corpse deep underground. Thus, today's lesson is on dragons, and next time, the spiritual tomb of Albion. There are 3 classifications for phantasmal species, those being magical, phantasmal, and divine. Dragons have variants in all 3, being the pinnacle species within each one. This ultimate phantasmal creature has been around even before the Age of Gods, greatly influencing human history. Though they appropriate traits from other creatures, dragons are identified by their ability to generate mana simply by breathing. It's reasonable to describe them as large masses of mana, capable of growing stronger by absorbing additional mana from other sources. Although rare, this includes a dragon's ability to devour and absorb its own kind. By doing so, they swell in size and strength, and if they amass enough concentrated power, they can even manifest singularities. It's worth noting that wyverns are a smaller subspecies of dragon. Their mana-absorbing capabilities are limited, and are especially vulnerable to a certain Japanese swordsman. Given that the lungs of a proper dragon are essentially mana factories, it's no surprise that dragons derive great power from their breath. To an extent, it's possible to categorize dragons by the properties of their breath, which often corresponds to their color. Naturally, red dragons breathe fire, but there are many other kinds. For instance, blue dragons breathe thunder, and black dragons spew acid. Additional colors include white, gold, silver, and green. Through both evolution and mystery, we can observe differences between dragons of Eastern and Western origin. In the Far East, dragons tend to develop akin to serpents, often with divine origin. Specifically, Chinese dragons are known for having a reverse scale below their chins. Simply touching this region can infuriate a dragon, prompting it to rampage the planet. When it comes to snake-like dragons, a prime example is Japan's Dragon of Disaster, Yamata no Orochi. It is an 8-headed, 8-tailed monster central to the nation's mythology. This includes tales of Orochi's daughter, Ibuki Doji, and her Oni form as Shuten Doji. Her incarnation carries on as one of Japan's 3 great monsters. Another Japanese dragon is Oryo. In her case, she was a small dragon who washed up on Japan and was shunned from birth. Eventually, she was sealed away on the summit of Takachiho until being freed from eternal torment by the warrior Sakamoto Ryoma, who selflessly pulled out the lance pinning her down. Since then, Oryo has fallen for her savior, forever entwined with his destiny. Interestingly, there are some accounts of dragons incarnating as horses. Chief among them is Bai Long, the horse of Xuanzang Sanzang. This steed is the child of the Dragon King of the 4 Seas, granting it inhuman powers. Also famous in Chinese folklore is Sibushang, the mount of Taigong Wang. It too is part horse, part dragon. Such creatures are not exclusive to Asia, as the tales of Bogatyr Dobrynya Nikitich speak of a horse named Burko. When summoned as a servant, Dobrynya's steed becomes cursed, taking the form of a dragon. The cause is Zmi Gorinich, a nefarious creature of the Zmi, a Russian race of dragons known for having multiple heads. Gorinich, the Serpent of the Mountains, was a shapeshifter who caused havoc for humans, prompting Dobrynya to slay it. One of the world's most iconic serpents is the Leviathan. This beast, used as a component in alter ego Meltrolus, is an enormous sea serpent from the Old Testament. While the Leviathan is a perilous dragon in her own right, she also gave birth to the hard-shelled Tarrasque, a dragon that tormented southern France during the 1st century. This monster preyed upon ships of the Rhone River, eating victims of capsized vessels. His tyranny came to an end when Saint Martha beat him into submission. Going further back in time, there are the Bashmu, horned snake-like dragons spawned from the Mesopotamian goddess Tiamat. These dragons have long since left the world, but Semiramis can summon a weaker imitation of them within her hanging gardens of Babylon. From Greek mythology, we have Typhon, a western progenitor of dragonkind. Born from Gaia and Tartaros, this monster opposed Zeus, ultimately being sealed away in Mount Etna. In the modern era, a mage named Bai Ruolong discovered and ate Typhon's flesh, gaining its divine powers. Also hailing from Greece is the Dragon of Colchis, a creature tasked with guarding the legendary Golden Fleece. Many falsely assume that heroes involved with the fleece, such as Medea or Jason, have a strong tie to this dragon and can therefore summon it. However, this is not true. While the Golden Fleece can indeed summon its draconic protector, it requires a mage talented enough to perform the summoning. For the 5th Holy Grail War, the mage Atram Galiasta sought out Medea, hoping to conjure the Dragon of Colchis, only to find out she could not do so. Another divine dragon is Vritra from Hindu mythology. In their battle, it is said that Indra vowed not to harm this dragon with weapons made of wood, stone, or metal, and to never attack during day nor night. Cleverly avoiding these restrictions, Indra defeated Vritra at twilight with a column of sea foam. While not exactly a dragon directly, the 7th Labyrinth of Kolbak Alcatraz is home to a dragon-shaped golem that imitates a proper dragon's strength. It is one of the world's most powerful golems, with scale-covered legs and metallic armor. Its magic core is potent enough to sustain a heroic spirit. Based on the legends I've just described, it's clear that dragons and humans are incompatible, often fighting one another. The most iconic cases involve dragons being killed for tormenting humans, but by and large, it is humanity that initiates this conflict. There are exceptions, of course, such as the Elder Dragon. In addition to breathing mana, dragons can perform Magecraft through a special dragon language. This allows them to create golems and their own workshops. The Elder Dragon used this to his advantage, creating a magical workshop on a dragon-infested island. Greedy, this dragon used the workshop to lure in humans for their meat and money. As a servant of Chaldea, King Gilgamesh once led his master to the island, and together they vanquished the Elder Dragon. Dragons and their lust for gold can be traced as far back as the epic poem Beowulf. In it, there was a fire-breathing dragon that hoarded treasures and attacked Beowulf's kingdom. In turn, the hero fought the dragon, and while he succeeded, the dragon's poison brought about his demise. As a product of mystery, dragons are susceptible to human imagination. Stories and concepts of dragons give them life, much like gods. In that regard, the concept of a dragon can be more influential than its actual body. When a dragon is born from human fear or reverence, it is known as a true dragon. The most famous of these true dragons is Fafnir, an embodiment of greed found in the Nibelungenlied and Volsunga saga. In German legend, the hero Siegfried hunted down Fafnir for hoarding the treasure Das Rheingold. He sliced Fafnir open, and its blood washed over his body. This blessed him with the dragon's power, his skin becoming the invincible armor of Fafnir. Norse myth describes Sigurd as slaying Fafnir and eating the dragon's heart to obtain wisdom. Historians often assume that Siegfried and Sigurd's feats are simply variations of the same tale, but it's also possible that there were 2 separate dragons named Fafnir. This is because, on a conceptual level, living beings can actually become dragons through a process called evil dragon phenomenon. Those who exhibit overwhelming greed may actually transform into Fafnir, or a variation thereof. In Sigurd's tale, for instance, Fafnir was originally the brother of a dwarf who had succumbed to greed. Another victim or benefactor of the evil dragon phenomenon is Kiyohime. After being misled and betrayed by a traveling monk named Anchin, she fell into a state of despair, grief, and hatred. Her love for Anshin turned to spite and delusion, accompanied by her transforming into a fire-breathing serpent. Without having any dragon's blood, her obsession took on the concept of a dragon. Since true dragons are often created from concepts, they are also often killed by concepts. Specifically, dragon slayers must invest all of their strength into taking dragons down, as though their accumulated efforts and willpower were more important than a given technique. You cannot simply ask one of these dragon slayers how they seized victory without also hearing their entire life stories. Two more famous true dragons are the red and white dragons found in the legends of King Arthur. It begins with the dragon of Albion, the very last pure-blooded dragon to linger in the world. When all other dragons migrated to the reverse side of the world, Albion stayed behind, believing itself strong enough to endure. Eventually, the Age of Gods came to an end, and the path to the reverse side nearly closed. By the time Albion decided to leave, mystery had already declined on Earth, and the Age of Man had already begun. Seeking a greater source of mystery, Albion tried to dig its way deep into the Earth, but died in the process. Its corpse grew into an underground labyrinth known as the Spiritual Tomb of Albion, which remains one of the most mana-rich areas in the entire planet. From its corpse also came two true dragons, based upon a prophecy foretold by Merlin. He told of Britain's upcoming battle with the Saxons, representing Britain as the red dragon, and the foreign invaders as the white dragon. These dragons fought each other, and their struggle carried on in the form of their vessels. Uther Pendragon's brother Vortigern plotted Britain's demise, and became an embodiment of the white dragon after drinking its blood. In opposition, Merlin assisted Uther in imbuing his child Artoria with the essence of the red dragon. Following Merlin's prophecy, Vortigern and Artoria would battle one another as humans possessing strong dragon traits. In Artoria's case, she inherited a magic core which surpasses even the greatest magic circuits. It grants her magical resistance capable of nullifying Magecraft from the Age of Gods. As her body transforms into that of King Arthur, Grey also develops a draconic magic core. Against her will, she is trading her identity for tremendous might. Essentially, Artoria became a dragon as the result of Magecraft. In Vortigern's case, he became a dragon through the evil dragon phenomenon. Beyond this, it's also possible for humans to simply be born with dragon's blood. Such is the case for the Blood Countess, Elizabeth Bathory. While her family's coat of arms represents a dragon, she literally has mixed dragon's blood coursing through her veins. Her dragon's breath emits not fire, but sound waves filled with mana. For as much as she wants to be worshipped as an idol, her singing constitutes a serious threat. During the time of Shuten Doji, we have the hero Kintaro, later named Kintoki of Minamoto no Raiko's Four Heavenly Kings. He too is a mixed-blood human, the son of Raijin. As a red dragon hybrid, he has the strength of a monster, allowing him to slay other Oni. In summation, dragons are the pinnacle of phantasmal species. Their lungs generate mana, and their breath takes on many devastating forms. There are different kinds of dragons, both Eastern and Western, playing a major role in human mythology. On occasion, this mythology can prove so influential that the concept of a dragon overrides their actual physiology. This allows dragons to embody emotions like greed or obsession, in turn allowing humans and other creatures to become dragons. Others are born with dragon's blood, while some are made draconic through Magecraft. Clearly, our discussion on dragons has left me without ample time to cover Albion's remnants, the Spiritual Tomb. Thus, for our next lesson, I will both detail the tomb, as well as its relevance to the clock tower. In our previous lesson, I covered dragons, the pinnacle of phantasmal species. It is due to one of these dragons, Albion, that humanity has access to profound mystery, even in the modern era. Albion's remains, the Spiritual Tomb of Albion, is a critical asset to the Mages Association, literally serving as the foundation upon which the clock tower was built. Thus, today's lesson shall focus on Albion and the Spiritual Tomb, covering both its structure and influence. Albion, whose body comprises the Spiritual Tomb, was a dragon as old as the earth itself. Perhaps due to overconfidence, Albion chose to remain in reality, while most other phantasmal species migrated to the reverse side of the world. The age of man did not deter this mountain-sized behemoth, at least not at first. By the time Albion finally yearned for the reverse side, the pathway was no more. In a stubborn fit, the dragon decided to create its own path, relying on the mystery that still lurked beneath the Earth's surface. It dug deep underground, but died midway. Or rather, I should say its body died. One part, Albion's head, is still alive, continuing to gaze toward its destination. The rest of Albion became fused with the Earth to become a cavern, and tectonic movement transformed that cavern into a complex labyrinth. This process took centuries, long enough for mages to see a drastic decline in their performance. Our modern era is but a fraction of what it once was, at least when it comes to mana and mystery. Deep into the spiritual tomb, however, that prosperity still lingers. It remains an isolated ecosystem, flourishing with rare plants and creatures that have evolved independently from the surface. Many of these creatures have developed an ability to deflect mana, making them especially formidable. In addition, the tomb's tunnels are absolutely brimming with magical artifacts and talismans which can be salvaged. To capitalize on this symbolic goldmine, the Mages Association set up its headquarters, the Clock Tower, right atop the tomb. As you should know, however, the Clock Tower is far from a united front. Rather, it is a den of political conflict between warring factions. It stands to reason that these factions, and their respective families, all share a vested interest in the tomb's treasures. To prevent any one of these groups from monopolizing Albion, they instead agreed to establish a more neutral organization that would oversee and manage its excavations. This organization is the Secret Autopsy Division, a strange part of the Clock Tower that maintains its independence. Their responsibility rests primarily in governing who can access the tomb. This means issuing permits to those allowed in and imprisoning those who happen to enter without permission. Attempting to subvert the division's authority brands mages as lawless smugglers. Beyond merely confiscating their salvage, the Autopsy Division denies smugglers access to the surface. In its uppermost layer, the tomb contains a mining city where criminals are forced to work for the opportunity to buy their way back to the surface. Despite this being a form of modern slavery, there are actually many mages who deliberately choose this way of life. The tomb presents an opportunity to young families and those suffering a decline in their magic circuits. Not only does the tomb compensate with ample mana in the air, tremendous profits can be made from excavating its lower levels. To accomplish this, mages in the tomb typically work in teams of 5, composed of excavators who dig out resources, a lookout/navigator, and fighters who can fend off hostile creatures. Residing in the mining city also places a political barrier between mages and the Clock Tower, making it ideal for those wanting to conceal themselves and lay low. There is a strange sense of unity between mages in the tomb that the Clock Tower lacks. Nevertheless, many mages still see this as a prison. The majority of contenders aren't even proper mages, but mere spellcasters with no aspiration for the route. Once they make it inside, either they wait to be released or pay up for an early freedom. These mages who get out are called survivors. They happen to include extremely rare cases in which mages escape the tomb, slipping past the Autopsy Division's careful guard. Officially, there are only 4 entrances to the tomb, which should make it easy to fortify. The entrance at their headquarters in Soho, for example, requires the aid of a special elevator just to reach it. So just how would a prisoner actually escape? Well, it's safe to describe the tomb as an intermediary between reality and the reverse side. It exists between 2 different textures simultaneously. As a result, Albion's physical coordinates aren't set in stone. Its precise location is an anomaly akin to the Wandering Sea or Bermuda Triangle. Effectively, the spiritual tomb is always in flux, behaving like quantum particles. This means that, occasionally, coordinates within the tomb wind up distorted, appearing as cracks above the surface. These cracks can be used as portals, allowing mages to traverse tens of kilometers in a single bound. Thus, while there are only 4 official entrances, there are actually many more emerging and vanishing over time. For mages able to predict and exploit these portals, smuggling from Albion becomes feasible. Technically, the clock tower does more than just rest atop Albion as a foundation. It actually extends beneath the surface, and it can be said that these lower floors constitute the tower's true form, housing many hidden libraries only available to the elite. The tomb proper doesn't start until 10 kilometers below the earth with Albion's tail. This is where the aforementioned mining city Magecraft can be found. Complete with an artificial dome providing the illusion of a night and day cycle, the city houses its own isolated community of misfit mages. From here, mages either excavate the lower floors or conduct their own businesses, such as restaurants or marketplace stalls. Their buildings are constructed not from concrete, but dirt solidified through spells. This goes hand in hand with the creation of golems that conduct much of the city's manual labor. In the case of less aggressive species, mages have taken to riding on creatures captured within the tomb, mainly those with hard shells that resemble rhinos. Given the danger and casualties, it is normal for city vendors to sell mage organs. Intense fights break out in the streets, encouraging bystanders to keep a low profile. Yet, at the same time, these mages are all in the same situation together. There's less secrecy, allowing for various mage workshops to be combined into a larger facility known as the Composite Workshop Kriegula. Here, they mass-produce items such as concentrated spirit ore. The next 30 kilometers below the city comprise what's called the Great Magic Circuit, a cavernous ley line inhabited by magical beasts. Also called the Vein Corridor Ad Vena, this is where the bulk of excavations occur. Very few mages would want, or even be able to proceed deeper. From 40 to 60 kilometers deep, we have the Ancient Heart, which is quite literally the dug-out remains of Albion's heart. It may not beat like an actual heart, but the dense mana in this region pulses like its own form of heartbeat. At this depth is a natural bounded field that halted most of the dragon's body. Only its head proceeded deeper. Precisely because of this bounded field, the clock tower finds the Ancient Heart to be one of the most secure and private locations on the planet. Thus, they have chosen it as the site for their most intense discussions. The 12 lords, or their representatives, sometimes gather here in a surreal meeting room to hold what is called the Grand Roll, where the association's greatest decisions are made. One hot topic among these lords is whether or not to forcibly redevelop the tomb. With each passing year, the resources generated from Albion continue to decline. The Democratic faction believes that hollowing out the upper layers would allow for more rare and efficient salvages at a time when they're needed most. The aristocratic faction disagrees, instead insisting to hoard those limited resources among the elite. Even deeper, at the 60 to 80 kilometer range, is a facility called the Carolan Observatory. This is where Albion's head resides, detached from the rest of its body. The rich mana this deep in helps keep the dragon's head alive, and its eyes continue to stare further down. Astonishingly, this desperate stare has been able to dig even deeper, despite the dragon itself being unable to move. The Carolan Observatory is where sealing designations are decided, and where sealed mages are kept. Formally, humans have never proceeded beyond the 80-kilometer depth. This is because the following 400 kilometers constitute a domain only fairies can traverse. Had Albion been able to keep digging, it would have reached the reverse side, specifically the Utopia of Avalon, at a staggering depth of 2,700 kilometers below the surface. Despite what I just said, there is one case where a mage has unintentionally breached the domain of fairies. Within the Great Magic Circuit is a shortcut called the Pit of Oblivion. It is a singular tunnel that dives straight down to the Ancient Heart and beyond. Even though this is a shortcut, it's not a portal, and the free fall to the bottom takes hours, even with the aid of mystic codes such as Icarus wings that allow for accelerated diving. The true potential of this pit was discovered when Dr. Heartless, a mage originally named Kuro Adashino, was pushed in by his own excavation team. He fell straight to the land of fairies, who proceeded to take his heart in exchange for power. Almost like a gatekeeper to this fairy domain, a six-eyed phantasmal monster rests at the bottom of the pit. Ominously named the ruler of Albion, this creature surpasses human comprehension. It is thought that Dr. Heartless reached the fairies after being swallowed by this beast. In summation, the spiritual tomb of Albion is a labyrinth beneath the earth where mystery from the Age of Gods still thrives. Coveting its resources, the Mages Association built the clock tower above the tomb and allows the secret autopsy division to manage its excavation. Many mages find themselves entering the tomb without permission, and as a result, are forced to live as slaves at the mining city Magecraft. In rare cases, mages have been able to bypass the autopsy division and smuggle rare artifacts from the tomb. The clock tower uses Albion's heart to host their grand roles. Even deeper in leads to the domain of fairies, and even Avalon itself. Perhaps you've noticed that, of all the layers, I've intentionally avoided the Carillon Observatory. This is because, for our next lesson, I will be covering it in greater detail in conjunction with sealing designations. Ironically, for as much as the association aims to promote mages, it has a system that essentially punishes them for their profound abilities. In our previous lesson, I covered the spiritual tomb of Albion, the labyrinth the clock tower was built upon. Part of this tomb is unique in that it shelters the stored mages held captive under sealing designation. This is one of the most ominous practices the association has, so it is urgent that I cover it in today's lesson. Fundamentally, the Mages Association is a troublesome organization composed of many feuding lords and their families. Some are concerned most with the preservation of Magecraft, while others only care about upholding their elitist stature. Scattered between these dominating forces are individual mages who follow their own unique path to the root. Without any political sway, these mages sometimes achieve great things, and left to their own devices, they will keep that knowledge to themselves. In some cases, a mage's talents are exclusive to their own body and bloodline, making it seemingly impossible for others to replicate. Should these mages die, their discoveries and abilities are also lost. To that end, the association makes it a priority to try and preserve these outstanding mages. Put bluntly, a sealing designation is a mark, a branding if you will, that is given to a mage selected for preservation. On one hand, receiving a designation is like a badge of honor, an official recognition of a mage's achievements. On the other, it is quite literally a death sentence. Mages who comply with a sealing designation are taken in and sealed away. Whether or not the target dies, their pursuit of Magecraft comes to an abrupt end. As a result, most mages who receive a designation go into hiding, seeing the association as an enemy rather than an ally. No mage is happy with this decree, or at the very least, no mage who is can testify as such. The mages selected for sealing typically fall into two categories. First, there are hermits, mages who have already separated from the association. They seclude themselves from the rest of the world to perfect their craft in secret. These cases are more common, but less severe. Often, the association will settle for surveillance rather than apprehension. What tips the scale is the value of that target's research. Philosophers, however, are mages who actively improve their craft at the expense of rules and regulations. Their research affects innocent people, in turn risking the concealment of mystery. While it's still a priority to preserve these mages, it is more urgent that they be eliminated. At the lowest level of the spiritual tomb of Albion, one will find the Secret Judgment Division, or Carillon Observatory. This facility is led by the mage Miliun Carillon, who is known as the giver of all sealing designations. It is ironic that one of the world's top magi is responsible for judging whether or not other mages have grown too much for their own good. Regardless, when a sealing designation is announced, it is accompanied by the ringing of a giant bell within the observatory. Certainly, it seems counterintuitive to have an observational facility built so deep underground. However, mages have their way of observing the world beyond our ordinary senses. It is more important that captives remain hidden, especially considering the grim nature of their processing. This remains a secret even to many in the clock tower, but when a designated mage is caught, only their brain, eyes, nerves, and magic circuits are preserved. These components are kept in specialized jars that serve as the mage's exoskeleton. The rest of their body is discarded unless deemed relevant to their abilities. Most would consider this murder, but the association feels it is a necessary process given how immortality isn't exactly feasible. Using this method, still living mages can research and even use preserved remains to cast spells. It is almost as if designated mages are turned into mystic codes, their achievements stripped away for the sake of other mages. Those who know the truth are even more likely to avoid being captured. To actually make these apprehensions, the association relies on specialized mages known as Sealing Designation Enforcers, or simply Enforcers for short. Similar to how the Church hires executors to hunt and destroy vampires and heretics, the Enforcers are tasked with hunting and capturing targets designated by the Carillon Observatory. For as important as their job is, most Enforcers are strangely looked down upon. Even though the elite benefits from this service, they consider it dirty work only fit for clock tower rejects or novices. To that end, Enforcers aren't given enough pay or authority to perform their duties. For example, they are forbidden from interfering with rituals like the Holy Grail Wars, even when designated mages are participating. One of the most skillful enforcers is Bazette Fraga McRemitz. She was born to a long-running mage family in an Irish village. Her ancestors had separated from the association, but at the age of 15, Bazette sought to rejoin the association, but was evaluated poorly. Considered useless for the clock tower, she was instead employed as an enforcer for her combat prowess. Due to a recommendation from Kire Kotomine, Bazette was able to set aside her title to participate in the war as a master. Had only she known that Kire was planning to kill her and steal away her servant, Ku Hullen. Another mage who used to be an enforcer is Cornelius Alba. During his prime, he was seen aiding the Holy Church in quelling a vampire outbreak on Alimango Island. He would later go on to study at the clock tower under Inorai Valuoletta Atraholm. A lesser-known enforcer is Forte, the eldest daughter of a long-lasting family. Throughout her many battles, she once broke protocol to protect a sealing-designated mage. In all, there are about 30 official enforcers, but that number is supplemented by various freelance mages who treat sealing designations as bounties. By essentially sniping prey from the enforcers, these freelancers can sell captive mages back to the association at inflated prices. Natalia Kaminsky is one such freelancer. She and her protege, Kiritsugu Emiya, also hunt down designated mages, but given their rarity, the two thrive mainly off of executing heretics. An actual designation is considered big game in this business. Both enforcers and freelancers are lucky to come across even one per decade. One of these rare cases was actually Kiritsugu's father, Noritaka Emiya. His family's unique craft was time manipulation, which utilized a reality marble to either accelerate or halt the flow of time. The association gave Noritaka a sealing designation after it was discovered that his magecraft could be used to reach the root. By concealing themselves in a shrunken, bounded field, a mage could accelerate their flow of time to survive past the end of the universe, where the root would surely lie. Even knowing this was just a theory, the association sought to capture him anyway. Thus, Noritaka spent more than 20 years hiding from the enforcers, during which his wife was found and killed. Barely escaping this encounter, he and his son fled to Alimango Island in the Philippines. There, he was able to further his research, using spells to slow the aging process of plants. Things went south when Noritaka's assistant Shirley used the formula on herself, which transformed her into a dead apostle. Her condition spread throughout the village, drawing in the Holy Church, enforcers, and freelancers alike. Despite corrupting so many innocent victims, Noritaka figured he could simply pack up and try again elsewhere. Rejecting this arrogance, it was his own son who ended his life. While Kiritsugu still utilizes time manipulation to slow his heart and accelerate his body, the association was satisfied with merely preserving Noritaka's remains. These remains were held in the Carillon Observatory until, decades later, Dr. Heartless would break in and steal them in an effort to tap into the Emiya's magecraft. Another seal-designated mage is Satsuki Kurogiri. After an encounter with fairies, he suffered a condition that prevented him from retrieving memories. His brain could store new memories, but to recognize them as his own, he had to store them as descriptive words. This obscure approach to thought allowed him to both learn and master what is called the unified language, the primordial language of ancient Babylonia. Given its age, the unified language is said to draw upon records from the root. Thus, as the only living person to speak this language, the association has targeted Satsuki with a sealing designation. While it is rare for sealing designations to be issued in the first place, it is even rarer for them to be rescinded. However, it is possible for a mage to have their seal lifted if they can prove useful to the association in other ways. One such mage is Nigel, who had earned a seal for his potent magical drugs. Before he could be captured, however, he was chosen as a master by the Holy Grail and gifted command spells. So long as Nigel pledged to win the Grail War for them, the association was willing to put his sealing on hold. Taking advantage of this grace period, Nigel tried to stall the war while he perfected his craft. Another rare exception is the brilliant mage Toko Aozaki. Despite being rejected as the inheritor of her family's magic crest, Toko studied at the clock tower and quickly made a name for herself by making automaton puppets. While she can churn out hundreds of mass-produced models with ease, her crowning achievement is making dolls that are incredibly lifelike. It is said that, since their inception, humans have diversified genetically to the point where we no longer resemble our primordial model. Through her doll making, Toko aimed to recreate the original human, but eventually gave up on such a lofty goal. Regardless, she achieved something just as impressive by creating a completely identical doll of herself, one that is indistinguishable from the real thing. This is what earned her a sealing designation. Fortunately, however, Toko was able to prove she was worth more alive than dead. When she studied at the clock tower, she specialized in runes and helped the association recover various runes that had been lost to time. She sold these runes to the clock tower in exchange for having her sealing designation revoked. As a safety measure, though, she kept a few of these runes to herself, just in case the association tried to back out of the deal. Sure enough, years later, she once again got into trouble with the clock tower and had her designation reinstated. It is the first time a mage has ever received a sealing designation twice. Beyond issuing seals and preserving mages, the Carillon Observatory has one other related function. Would you believe me if I told you mages have a system for copyright? Indeed, the association has a thriving economy made from selling patents. Since the observatory is connected to a rich mana ley line, it can detect the use of patented spells from deep underground. In conjunction with several smaller observatories, the clock tower can trace spells across most of the planet. This means that you cannot use another mage's spells or techniques without first paying for them. In summation, mages are constantly on edge when it comes to perfecting their craft. Those who achieve new feats are essentially punished through sealing designations. Rather than receiving extra funding or support, the clock tower instead sends enforcers to capture, kill, and preserve accomplished mages so that their spells aren't lost to time. Personally, I feel this system stunts the growth of Magecraft. Hunting heretics is one thing, but in the process of preserving a mage's work, the association is preventing that mage from growing their craft even further. Oftentimes, who receives a designation or not is politically motivated. Since the Carillon Observatory gets its name from observing mana Leylines, I plan to dedicate our next lesson to elaborating on exactly what Leylines are, as well as how we can use them. In our previous lesson, I covered the ominous practice of sealing designations. Those who are captured in this process are taken to the Carillon Observatory, which happens to be a strategic location for all the flourishing mana found in Albion. It is important for mages to be aware of where mana flows throughout our planet, given how our own internal mana, or ode, can only take us so far. Thus, for today's lesson, I will cover mana Leylines and how mages have used them to their advantage. After all, Leylines are taught to mages of the Clock Tower through Misteel, the Department of General Fundamentals. It is common knowledge all mages need to understand in order to succeed. As you should already know, mana exists on Earth because it's produced by the world, better known as Gaia. However, the mana it creates is not evenly distributed. While much of it has leaked to the atmosphere, the majority of Earth's mana remains concentrated within Leylines, also sometimes called dragon veins. Scholars have referred to Leylines as the planet's breathing, heartbeat, and even its brain. Personally, I find it best to imagine Leylines coursing through the Earth like blood vessels. In another sense, they happen to be the planet's very own magic circuits. The location and state of these Leylines have dictated much of our world geography. Mages settle in spiritual lands where Leylines are especially strong or intersect. Over time, these places become hotbeds of worship and civilization, but ideally, mages hope to keep spiritual lands to themselves. That way, the land's flourishing nature can be preserved. In a loose sense, the Mages Association has taken control over most of the world's best Leylines. That said, actually governing these many territories falls to local families who pledge allegiance to the association. Such loyalty is never guaranteed, like when the Yigida Millennia clan rebelled against the association. Still, it goes to reason that the association's headquarters, the Clock Tower, was built upon Britain's Leyline cavern, Albion. Deep down at the Carolan Observatory, a mystic code connects with Britain's Leylines, expanding outward to detect traces of mana being used the world over. This connection is important for research and defense, as mages often need to rely on the Earth as a greater source of mana than they can provide by themselves. For as united as the association is, mages still fight each other to establish territory. Their control over the land is just as valuable as their individual skills, which is how long-running families tend to maintain their dominion. For example, the mage Toko Aozaki is one of the world's strongest mages, at least when you look at her individual capabilities. It's scary then to consider she isn't even the true successor of her family. That honor goes to her sister Aoko, who lives in Misaki Town and maintains control of the land with help from the Kuonji family. Upset at not inheriting this privilege, Toko once tried to fight her sister, starting first by weakening the town's control over the local Leylines. Otherwise, even with her superior strength, she would be going in at a disadvantage. The two sisters were willing to put their lives on the line over a territory dispute. In order to conduct Grail Wars, it's necessary to do so at venues with adequate mana. Fuyuki, Japan, specifically the Leylines at Mount Enzo, for instance, was needed to hold the 5 main Holy Grail Wars. There's a reason why Ryudo Temple, which had been built along the mountain, acts as the Leylines' keystone. It is one of 4 possible places where the Grail can actually manifest in the city. The strength of a land's Leylines dictates how many servants can be summoned in a Grail War. For example, Fuyuki's Leylines allow for 7 servants. Even though its Greater Grail had a backup system that would activate in the event of a conspiracy between mages, summoning an additional 8 servants would put strain on the Leyline. In Romania, however, there was more than enough mana throughout the city of Trifas to facilitate a great Holy Grail War. This is less that Fuyuki's land is weak, and more that the Yigida Millennia faction had spent years gathering mana into their Leylines. Mind you, Leylines don't release infinite mana. Something as large as a Grail War can drain them, and it takes years for them to replenish. As such, a quick way to sabotage a Grail War is to target the Leylines. Kiritsugu Emiya planned to do this exact thing following Fuyuki's 4th war. He planted explosives to disturb the Leylines, provoking the onset of an earthquake 30 years later. However, because the 4th war ended prematurely, the 5th war started only 10 years later. Kiritsugu's plan failed. Ultimately, it was Waver Velvet and Rin Tosaka who would finally dismantle the Greater Grail. Still, as Kiritsugu's plan suggests, damaging a Leyline can destroy the land around it. This concept was immortalized when the goddess Ishtar used her noble phantasm, Angaltaki Galshe, to thrust a spear into the main Leyline of Mount Ebi, collapsing the entire thing with a single strike. As you can see, Leylines aren't just tools for making Grail Wars. They have many other uses. For one, the Mystic Eye train, Rail Zeppelin, actually runs on the planet's Leylines as its tracks. This allows the train to travel routes that would otherwise be impossible. By that same token, should these Leylines get disrupted, the train will be forced to make an emergency stop. Dr. Heartless, aka Kuro Adashino, took advantage of this to create an imitation Holy Grail. Despite not being in Fuyuki, he was able to tap into the Greater Grail through the Leylines, allowing him to summon his very own servant into the Faker class. Of course, to pull something like this off, one needs to know where these ley lines are. Generally, mages can learn to detect nearby ley lines. Even ones who are weak, like Waver Velvet, can specialize in finding them. This helped him survive the Fourth Holy Grail War. When his servant Iskandar had exhausted his mana in a prior battle, Waver knew to visit a secluded ley line in the forest and rest there. In this case, the ley line compensated for his insufficient ode. Leylines saved him again years later when he was captured by a mage named Barzan. By disrupting a dormant ley line, he caused a swarm of evil spirits to run wild and attack his captors. Despite this, a mage like Waver can't compare to a goddess. Medusa was a former Earth goddess, and as a servant, she has a more sensitive connection to the planet. It lets her easily sense disturbances in nearby ley lines. Ironically, however, her blood fort Andromeda actually damages the ley lines it surrounds. As a result, she can never reactivate it in the same place twice. The mage Yvette L. Lehrman uses gems to create artificial mystic eyes. Her Iolite eye, in particular, strengthens her ability to see mana, and by extension, ley lines. Kairi Shishigo, a necromancer who fought in the Great Grail War of Trifus, has an affinity for underground tombs and catacombs. Much to his own servant's dismay, Kairi knew these catacombs had the highest quality ley lines around. Setting up camp there kept them safe and efficiently replenished their mana. Sometimes technology is needed to study ley lines on a broader scale. The Animosphere are a family of stargazers who observe the planet and predict its future. Olga Marie Animosphere carries a small mystic code that can map the Earth's ley lines onto a projection. This concept is applied on a larger scale with Caldeus, which can analyze not just the current ley lines, but those of the past and future. The Chaldea Security Organization uses this to help their masters find ley lines within singularities. It is a critical strategy for Chaldean masters to locate and establish ley line terminals. These are needed for communication and establishing summoning circles. In addition, the Animosphere family owns an offshore oil rig named Seraphix. This facility gathers resources for Chaldea, but its main purpose is to investigate ley lines. Seraphix researchers seek to connect a mage's circuits to the ley lines. Since magic circuits are bound to a mage's soul, it's possible to interface with the planet's soul by connecting with its circuits. Once you find a ley line, the next step is to use it. Let's go over some ways in which this is done. Paracelsus von Hohenheim was an alchemist who created magical items, including the Philosopher's Stone. By connecting a ley line to his territory, he could mass-produce magical jewels. During the Fifth Grail War in Fuyuki, Medea used her skill, territory creation, to make Ryudo Temple her base of operations. This was necessary because her master, Soichiro Kuzuki, was not a proper mage. At best, he could only anchor her to the world, not provide her with mana. Instead, Medea drew her mana from Fuyuki's ley lines, which wound up being far more than a master could possibly provide. She surrounded the temple with a barrier, hoping to keep the ley lines to herself, but there was a catch. To channel the ley lines, she needed to leave them a pathway into the temple. This forced her to leave a gap in the barrier where intruders could enter. Luckily, these ley lines were potent enough that she could summon her own assassin servant to guard the entrance. This servant was, by consequence, unable to leave the temple gate without vanishing. A similar dilemma occurred in the past with a Grail War known as the Waxing Moon Ritual. It was a makeshift system established by an onmyojin referencing knowledge of the future. As a byproduct, Japan's capital Edo summoned various rogue servants to keyline terminals, also called spirit fonts. They too could not leave their respective zones without being severely weakened. They could, however, travel to an extent with the help of a mage chaining together various ley lines. Perhaps more than any other city, Edo was built as a city of Magecraft, relying on ley lines surging throughout Japan's Kanto region. To win the Waxing Moon, participants needed to connect spirit fonts together, expanding their scope of influence before invading other territories. The ritual's overseer, Tsuchimikado Yasuhiro, was able to take control of Edo's ley lines to possess nearly all of the rogue servants to fight on his behalf. Lost belts, timelines that the universe would otherwise prune, can remain bound to proper human history by artifacts named fantasy trees. These trees lodge themselves into the earth and connect with its ley lines to expand a lost belt's scope of influence. The stronger the tree, the stronger its respective lost belt. In a similar fashion, the servant known as Vlad III has a skill called Demonic Defender of the State. It allows him to claim a region's ley lines as his own before a fight. In this capacity, he was able to transform modern Trefus into the land he once ruled over, granting him home turf advantage during the Great Grail War. In much the opposite fashion, Lost Belt ruler Qin Shi Huang limited the influence of China's ley lines by raising a civilization without heroes. This prevented the Throne of Heroes from connecting with the ley lines. In doing so, he prevented Chaldea from summoning reinforcements. That was, until the heroic sacrifice of Spartacus rekindled the people's hope, re-establishing the throne's connection to the Lost Belt. The goddess Kukulkan uses her noble phantasm, Kinshi Ahau Impact, to channel all the ley lines of South America, fueling her transformation into a massive, luminous body. The Greek machine gods, on the other hand, chose to create their own ley lines. At their base of Olympus, they constructed a crystalline mountain filled with a wireless network of divine-made ley lines. This was advantageous, as only they could utilize the mana from these ley lines, giving the gods even more dominion over mankind, preserving the Age of Gods in their Olympian Lost Belt. Sadly, us mortals are stuck doing things the hard way. The spiritual land known as Snowfield, Nevada, has long been cared for by an indigenous tribe calling themselves the Protectors of the Land. These people forged a contract with the land, linking their magic circuits to Snowfield's ley lines in order to wield strong Magecraft without the need to chant incantations. In exchange, however, the villagers sacrifice tens of thousands of children. Even those that survive, such as the priestess Tine, are bound to the land for life. They cannot leave without dying. In summation, Gaia provides our Earth with mana, most of which flows through a system of planetary veins known as ley lines. By learning how to detect and channel these ley lines, mages can accomplish far greater feats than they could on their own. This includes grand rituals like the Holy Grail Wars. The Mages Association claims dominion over most of the world's ley lines, but that control flows vicariously through local families that individually manage designated areas. Maintaining a spiritual land with fruitful ley lines allows prominent families to prosper across generations. It is also crucial that mages build their own workshops atop mana ley lines. Because of this, I will dedicate our next lesson to clarifying what these workshops are and what they entail. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all our anime lore, discussions, and Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or a YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like spicy exclusive vids and early access.
As always, celebrate your fandom. I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters. VideoGamer75, Dante Pendragon, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, The Nonchalant Ostrich, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Free Brick, Olympian Doll, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Lunar Works, Link Pendrago, Observer Bellis, James Hewitt, Uncanny EXP, Zamas Autonomous, Yuki Eidos, Scout, Crow Kalem, Saul Soto, Tristan Riggin, Major, Mei Fumato, Caitlin P, Sogai CH, Vladimirovna, The Taz 96, Jonathan Padua, Kengo X77, Hersha of E-Rated Hands, Alistair Bernadotte, and Akakaze Yume. Thank you all so much.